9. Jewelry brands tied to witchcraft. Most Christians own without realizing it. Do not skip this warning. King Solomon built the temple of God with his own hands and filled it with the glory of the Lord. Then he watched his own heart drift into darkness, one gift at a time, one foreign altar at a time. One beautiful object carried in by someone he trusted, and he never saw it coming. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 4, does not describe a dramatic fall. It describes a gradual one. And the instrument of that drift was not a weapon. It was adornment. It was the things he allowed close to his body and into his home without ever asking what spirit they served. That is exactly where this video begins. 9 jewelry brands are in homes across this country right now, on wrists and around necks of believers. These are people who love God sincerely and have no idea what they are wearing. Some carry the language of faith on their labels. Some use the cross as a design element. Some have been given as gifts at baptisms and graduations and Mother's Day brunches by people whose love was genuine. None of that changes what is underneath. And by the end of this video, you will be able to see clearly. You will see what most believers were never shown. Type "God guards what I wear" in the comments right now. Because what you place on your body is a declaration, and this is the moment to declare whose you are. Again, God guards what I wear. Like this video, subscribe, and stay until the very end. The final brand on this list is the most important one. It is the one most likely already sitting in your home, given to you by someone who loves you. And that is exactly what makes it the hardest one to let go of. Let's begin with the brand that put the word faith on its label, and then redefined what faith means. Brand 1. Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 30 does not leave room for good intentions. God warned his people directly. Do not inquire about their gods, asking how these nations serve them. The warning was not about bowing before a foreign altar in an obvious ceremony. It was about the slow adoption of spiritual frameworks dressed in words you already knew. Alex and Ani built an entire brand identity on that slow adoption. Their founder has spoken openly about chakras, energy vibrations, and the divine feminine as the foundation of their designs. The cross in their collection is not pointing to Calvary. It has been reassigned. It now means personal energy. The angel is not a messenger of the Most High. It has been reassigned too. It now means a spiritual guide drawn from New Age mysticism, not from the throne of God. This is called syncretism. It is the mixing of the holy with the unholy until the believer can no longer tell the difference. Scripture does not treat it gently. The people of Israel were destroyed by it not once but repeatedly across the entire Old Testament. Not because they abandoned God outright, but because they kept his name on their lips, all while filling their homes with the symbols of competing spiritual systems. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14 asks a question every believer must bring into the jewelry store. What fellowship has light with darkness? Not what resemblance. What fellowship? These are two different questions entirely. A bracelet can resemble faith while fellowshipping with something else entirely. The word on the tag does not determine the spirit behind the design. What you wear is a declaration. Alex and Ani has decided what that declaration means. The only question remaining is whether you will let them make it for you. If you have not typed "God guards what I wear" yet, this is your last chance. Because every believer who has ever been deceived was wearing something they never thought to question. One more time. God guards what I wear. Stay with this video until the very end. What is waiting in the final section is the brand most likely in your home right now. It was given to you by someone who loves you, and that is exactly what makes it the hardest one to let go of. The next brand does not borrow the language of faith. It borrows something older and more familiar than that. And most believers have been wearing it on their wrists for years without ever asking where the name came from. Brand 2. Pandora is one of the most recognized jewelry brands in the world. Millions of women own one of their charm bracelets, and millions more have received one as a gift. A husband, a daughter, a grandchild who wanted to give something meaningful. That is the genius of the design. You build it yourself, one small charm at a time, each one representing a memory, a milestone, a person you love. It feels personal. It feels like a story only you could tell. But the name of this brand is not accidental, and names carry weight in Scripture. Isaiah chapter 47, verse 13, speaks directly to the spiritual system hiding inside the most popular charms in Pandora's catalog. God rebukes Babylon in that verse and says, "Let your astrologers, your stargazers, your monthly prognosticators stand up and save you." He was not describing fringe practitioners in dark rooms. He was describing a culture that had normalized the consultation of celestial forces. Zodiac charms, birth sign pendants, star and moon symbols chosen because they represent the month you were born. That is astrology. It does not become something else because it is small and silver and fits on a bracelet. Pandora's catalog goes further. The evil eye charm is one of their best sellers. The Hamsa hand appears in multiple collections. The third eye motif shows up in designs marketed as spiritual protection. Every one of these symbols comes from a spiritual system that operates outside the covenant of God. They are not decorative. They are declarations. And Psalm 121, verse 7 does not leave room for a second source of protection. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. Not the eye on your wrist. Not the hand from another religion's tradition. The Lord alone. The name Pandora comes from Greek mythology. She was the first woman fashioned by the gods. And she carried a jar containing every curse and affliction that would ever be released into the world. That is the origin story of the brand your granddaughter wears to Sunday dinner. A name rooted in unleashed darkness, selling charms rooted in occult systems, to women who never thought to ask what they were building. One tiny piece at a time. They were building something they never fully understood. A story is only as good as the ending it is moving toward. This one was decided before the first charm was ever added. The next brand on this list does not hide behind mythology or spiritual language. It hides behind something far more disarming. The ordinary, everyday promise of a little good luck. Brand 3. Lucky Brand has built its entire identity on a single promise that you can wear good luck on your body. The four-leaf clover, the horseshoe, the number 7, the rabbit's foot. These are not random design choices. They are the vocabulary of a belief system as old as paganism itself. The belief that certain objects carry the power to bend circumstances in your favor. That fortune is something you can attract, carry, and control if you have the right symbols close enough to your skin. Most believers who own Lucky Brand pieces never thought of it that way. They bought a jacket or a bracelet because the design was appealing and the price was reasonable. And the word lucky felt like nothing more than a cheerful brand name. But Proverbs chapter 16, verse 33 does not allow for that kind of comfortable separation. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. Every outcome, every circumstance, every turn of events that a superstitious mind attributes to luck or fortune. Scripture says that belongs to God alone. When you wear a symbol designed to attract luck, you are not wearing something neutral. You are wearing a quiet declaration that fortune has a source other than the sovereign God who holds your life in his hands. This is precisely what God condemned in the Israelites in Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 18. They were not abandoning him in a single dramatic act of rebellion. They were adding. They kept their prayers. They kept their temple attendance. They simply also kept their lucky rituals, their fortune-seeking habits, their small daily acknowledgments of outside forces. And God looked at that addition and called it what it was: idolatry. Not tradition, not harmless culture. Idolatry. A lucky charm does not have to be ancient or foreign to function as a substitute for trust in God. It only has to be the thing you reach for when you want assurance that things will go well. Whatever you reach for in that moment is what you actually believe holds the outcome. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 draws the line with no room left on either side. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. All your heart, not most of it, and certainly not the part reserved for lucky charms. Drop your first name and your city or country in the comments below. Whether you are watching from Dallas, from the Philippines, from South Africa, or anywhere else across this world, let us know you are here. You are not alone in taking these warnings seriously. Stay until the end. What the final section reveals about the brand closest to the church is something most believers have never been warned about. The brand that follows speaks the same language, but in a quieter voice. And that quietness is precisely what has made it so effective at slipping past the spiritual discernment of an entire generation of believers. Brand 4. There is a category of deception that works not through shock but through subtlety. Not through symbols that alarm, but through language so ordinary it never triggers a question. Jewellery is that category made into a jewelry brand. Nothing about it looks dangerous. The designs are clean, understated, elegant. The marketing speaks of self-love, empowerment, and treating yourself well. Women in their 30s and 40s wear it. Their mothers admire it. And somewhere in the process, the evil eye pendant goes around a neck that belongs to a believer. A believer who never once stopped to ask what she was actually putting on. Romans chapter 12, verse 2 issues a command that cuts directly across the entire philosophy behind jewellery. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The world jewellery is selling is one where the self is the highest authority, where jewelry exists to declare your own worth to yourself, and celestial symbols are simply aesthetic choices. That is conformity dressed as confidence, and it is far more effective at reshaping the believer's mind than anything that announces itself as a threat. Jewellery's collections consistently feature the evil eye, crescent moon symbols, and celestial imagery drawn from astrological tradition. These are not background details. They are the visual language of a worldview Scripture directly confronts. A worldview that places created things, the moon, the stars, the eye, in a position of spiritual significance that belongs to God alone. Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 16 records one of the most grievous moments of Israel's idolatry. Men standing at the entrance of God's temple with their backs to him, faces turned toward the east, worshiping the sun. They had not left the temple. They had simply redirected their reverence while standing inside it. Wearing celestial symbols as daily jewelry is a quieter version of that same posture. The body remains in the life of faith. The spiritual allegiance has been turned toward something else. What makes jewelry specifically dangerous is not the evil eye charm itself. It is the normalization. When something appears in enough stores, on enough wrists, described in enough warm and reassuring language, the question stops being asked. Whether it belongs in a believer's life stops being asked altogether. Familiarity does not equal safety. It only equals comfort. And comfort is precisely the condition in which the enemy does his most effective work. What you wear every day eventually stops feeling like a choice. It starts feeling like simply who you are. The brand that follows understood that principle and used it with a precision that should give every believer pause. Brand 5. Walk through any Tory Burch store, and you will find it within the first few minutes. The evil eye. Sometimes rendered as a pendant, sometimes embedded in a bracelet, sometimes woven into a ring design. So elegantly crafted that a woman notices the craftsmanship long before she considers the origin. Tory Burch has made the evil eye one of its signature motifs. Alongside Buddhist prayer beads, Hindu-inspired medallions, and celestial symbols drawn from traditions outside Scripture. The brand presents all of it as sophisticated, globally inspired design, and that presentation has worked. Because the jewelry ends up on the wrists of women who would never knowingly bring a foreign spiritual system into their home. The evil eye amulet is not a decorative pattern. It is a protective talisman with roots in ancient polytheism. For thousands of years it has been used as a ward against curses and a tool for deflecting malevolent spiritual forces. A form of protection sought outside the covenant of God. That is its origin. That is its function. And wearing it as a charm is not a neutral aesthetic choice. It is an act of seeking protection from a forbidden source. Psalm 121, verses 7 and 8, does not leave a gap for a secondary guardian. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. That promise is total. It covers every direction, every hour, every threat seen and unseen. A believer who wears an evil eye amulet is not adding a layer of protection to what God provides. She is quietly declaring that what God provides is not quite enough. That is not a small theological error. That is a fracture in the foundation of trust. King Asa understood this fracture too late. 2 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 12 records his story. In his illness, he did not seek the Lord, but sought help from physicians alone. God's response was not anger at the doctors. It was grief at the king's divided heart. Asa had learned to look sideways for help in the moment, when looking upward was the only answer that would have held. The evil eye on a wrist is the same sideways look, small enough to feel harmless, significant enough to matter before God. What you place on your body as protection reveals what you actually believe about who is protecting you. If you have made it this far, you are not the average believer, and you never have been. You are someone who has already paid a price for your faith, who has sat with hard truths when the comfortable path was right there. You chose the narrow one anyway. That kind of persistence does not come from curiosity. It comes from a walk with God that has been tested and has held. What you are doing right now by staying in this video is the same thing you have been doing for decades. Refusing to look away when the truth costs something. Do not stop here. What remains in this video is the practical answer to everything you have just received. What to do today, starting with what is already in your home. The brand that follows has been trusted for generations because of its name, its prestige, and its elegance. And that trust is the very thing that has kept its spiritual history hidden in plain sight. Brand 6. Some names carry so much elegance that the question of what stands behind them never gets asked. Swarovski is one of those names. For generations, it has represented the finest crystal craftsmanship in the world. Grandmothers have kept Swarovski figurines on their mantels for decades. Mothers have given Swarovski jewelry to their daughters at graduations and weddings. The name itself feels like a guarantee, not just of quality, but of something trustworthy, something that has stood the test of time. And that feeling of trustworthiness is precisely what has kept its spiritual origins from ever being examined. Daniel Swarovski, the founder of the company, was a devoted follower of Theosophy. This is not a minor biographical footnote. Theosophy was a 19th-century occult movement, founded by Helena Blavatsky. It synthesized elements of Buddhism, Hinduism, Kabbalah, and Western occultism into a unified spiritual system. A system explicitly positioned as an alternative to Christianity. Blavatsky herself described the God of Scripture as an inferior deity. Theosophy was not simply a philosophical curiosity. It was a deliberate, spiritual worldview built in direct opposition to the covenant God of the Bible. And Daniel Swarovski built his company inside that worldview. The five-pointed star that serves as the brand's logo has deep roots in esoteric symbolism. Used for centuries in occult ritual and mystical tradition, long before it ever appeared on a crystal figurine. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 14 does not limit its warning to obvious darkness. Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. The most effective spiritual counterfeits are the ones that arrive wrapped in beauty, in craftsmanship, in generations of cultural trust. Swarovski crystal catches the light in a way that genuinely takes the breath away. That beauty is real. But beauty has never been a guarantee of spiritual safety. The most dangerous deceptions in Scripture were always the most attractive ones. 1 John chapter 4, verse 1 instructs every believer to test the spirits. Not to admire them. Not to assume they are safe because they are beautiful or ancient or beloved. To test them. The test is not whether something sparkles. The test is what foundation it was built on and whose kingdom that foundation serves. A gift given in love can still carry a history the giver never knew to question. The name on the box does not tell you everything about what is inside it. What comes next was not built on a founder's private philosophy. It was built on a public and deliberate desecration of the most recognizable symbol in the Christian faith. Brand 7. Pick up any piece of chrome hearts jewelry and the cross is impossible to miss. It is everywhere. On rings, on necklaces, on leather goods, on belt buckles worn by musicians and celebrities. Celebrities whose faces appear on every screen your grandchildren watch. The cross is the centerpiece of the entire brand. And that is precisely what makes this one so spiritually dangerous. Not the absence of the symbol, the destruction of everything the symbol means. Philippians chapter 3, verse 18 was written by a man who had seen this pattern before and wept over it. Paul told the church at Philippi, with tears, that many walk as enemies of the cross of Christ. Not enemies of the name, enemies of the cross. There is a category of opposition that does not deny the cross existed but strips it of its power and empties it of its meaning. Then reattaches it to something that has nothing to do with the resurrection. Chrome Hearts does exactly that. The cross in their designs is surrounded by skulls, daggers, Gothic lettering, and imagery drawn from the vocabulary of death and rebellion. The cross of Calvary points to an empty tomb. The cross of Chrome Hearts points to a graveyard. This is not accidental design. Gothic imagery and Christian iconography have been deliberately fused throughout the brand's history. The fashion world calls it a provocative aesthetic. But what the fashion world calls provocative, Scripture calls something more serious. Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20, names it plainly. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness. When the instrument of the greatest rescue in human history is dressed in the clothing of darkness and sold as something desirable, that is not artistic expression. That is a spiritual inversion with a price tag attached. The cross was never meant to be cool. It was meant to be costly. It cost the Son of God everything he had. And a brand that turns that costliness into a fashion statement has not honored the symbol. It has hollowed it out. It has handed the empty shell to a generation that may never know what they are not wearing. What you put around your neck makes a statement about what you believe hangs at the center of your faith. Chrome Hearts has already decided what that statement will be. The question is whether you will let it speak for you. The brand that follows did not stop at emptying the cross. It turned the cross upside down and called that a philosophy. Brand 8. Not every attack on the faith announces itself with rage. Some arrive dressed in runway lights and critical acclaim, carrying the approval of the cultural establishment. Vivienne Westwood built a career on exactly that kind of attack. Her jewelry collections have featured inverted crosses, mock crucifixes, and religious imagery, deliberately recontextualized. Placed within a framework of chaos, rebellion, and anti-Christian philosophy. She did not stumble into this territory. She occupied it intentionally and spoke about it publicly. As a principled rejection of the moral and spiritual framework that Christianity represents. Galatians chapter 6, verse 7 does not soften its warning for anyone, regardless of their cultural stature. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. The inverted cross, in Westwood's designs, is not an artistic interpretation open to generous reading. In the history of Western symbolism, it carries a specific meaning. One that occultists and Satanists have used deliberately for centuries as a statement of opposition to the lordship of Christ. Some have pointed to Peter's crucifixion as a redemptive reframing of that symbol. But Peter's humility before his Lord and a fashion designer's contempt for the gospel are not the same posture. And the difference matters enormously when you are deciding what to hang around your neck. This is where Chrome Hearts and Vivienne Westwood must be understood as two distinct categories of spiritual danger. Chrome Hearts empties the cross of meaning through aesthetic absorption. Westwood inverts it through deliberate philosophical opposition. One is passive destruction, the other is active. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 3, captures the spirit of that active opposition precisely. Tobiah the Ammonite said of the wall being rebuilt, even what they are building, if a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. The mockers were not silent. They were strategic. They targeted the thing being rebuilt and aimed their contempt directly at its foundation. Wearing jewelry that inverts or desecrates the cross does not require agreement with the philosophy behind it to carry spiritual consequence. What we place on our bodies and bring into our homes participates in a spiritual conversation whether we intend it to or not. Numbers chapter 33, verse 52 records God's instruction to Israel before entering the promised land. Destroy all their figured stones, and destroy all their metal images. He was not asking them to understand the theology behind every pagan symbol. He was asking them to remove it entirely. The cross of Christ is not a canvas for someone else's rebellion. It is the ground on which every believer stands. What follows is not rebellion dressed as fashion. It is something softer, something that has been handed from friend to friend as a gift of love. And that softness is the most disarming thing about it. Brand 9. Someone gave it to you as a gift. Or perhaps you bought it for yourself on a day when you needed something beautiful. The colors caught your eye, the price felt reasonable, and nothing about the display case suggested you should ask any questions. That is how Kendra Scott jewelry enters most homes. Quietly, warmly. Often wrapped in tissue paper inside a yellow box that has become one of the most recognizable gift packaging choices in America. It feels like kindness, and the kindness is genuine. But the belief system underneath the stones is not something the giver knew they were passing along. Isaiah chapter 44, verses 9 and 10, speaks to the heart of what Kendra Scott was built on. All who fashion idols are nothing, and the things they delight in do not profit. Who fashions a god, or casts an idol that is profitable for nothing? The brand was founded on the belief that certain gemstones carry spiritual energy. That specific stones can heal emotional wounds, calm anxiety, attract prosperity, and transfer power to the person wearing them. This is not marketing language stretched beyond its intended meaning. It is the stated spiritual philosophy behind the product. The stones are selected and promoted based on their supposed metaphysical properties. The belief that an object contains spiritual power capable of affecting the human soul is not a harmless alternative wellness perspective. Scripture calls it by its proper name. It is the worship of created things in place of the Creator. This is the form of idolatry that most believers never see coming, because it does not arrive in a temple or under a foreign name. It arrives in a yellow box from someone who loves you. It arrives at baptisms and birthdays and Mother's Day brunches. It arrives in the hands of women who attend church every Sunday and would be genuinely wounded if anyone suggested otherwise. That wound is real and it deserves to be handled with care. But Hosea chapter 4, verse 6 does not allow ignorance to serve as permanent shelter. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. The remedy for that destruction is not shame. It is exactly what this video is providing right now. Knowledge, clarity, the opportunity to see what was never explained. A stone cannot heal your soul. A gemstone cannot carry the weight of your anxiety to a throne room it has no access to. Only one name has that access. Only one sacrifice purchased that kind of power, and it was not found in a mine. 9 brands. 9 doorways that looked like nothing more than a jewelry store display case. And behind every single one of them, a belief system, a spiritual philosophy, or a deliberate desecration. One that Scripture identifies as dangerous to the soul of every believer who carries it without knowing what they are carrying. What you do with that knowledge now is the only question that remains. There will come a moment when every object you owned, every symbol you carried, every spiritual allegiance you made, will be seen in full light. Knowingly or unknowingly, it will all stand before the only one whose verdict lasts forever. Not the light of a jewelry store display case, the light of God Himself. And in that moment, the brand name on the box will not matter. The price you paid will not matter. The good intentions of the person who gave it to you will not matter. Only one question will remain. Did what you carry point toward God, or did it quietly point somewhere else? Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11, does not ask you to understand every spiritual system behind every object you own. It asks you to do one thing: have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. That is what this video has done. And now that the light has been turned on, you cannot unsee what God has shown you. You do not need to carry shame about what you wore before today. But you do need to carry discernment from this day forward. Examine what is in your jewelry box. Pray over what remains. Replace what must be removed with something that declares the only name worth wearing close to your heart. Subscribe to Bible Wisdom Spirit and watch the videos waiting for you next. This channel exists for one reason: to put the biblical truth in your hands that most pulpits are no longer providing, before the moment arrives when you need it most.